Well, ladies and gentlemen, everybody, it's good to see you. The guest will be arriving very, very soon. So, what I'll do until he gets here, we'll do a little bit of housekeeping and just keep sharing this, guys. Share this on all the social media platforms. Get it everywhere. Get it on Twitter. Get it on Facebook. Get it on all the other bits and pieces that there's too many to mention. And want to go through a few things first of all, if you're watching this on Richard Inman, which is great, when you switch over to counter media, don't unsubscribe to Richard Inman, because what we found is, or what we think is happening, is that the platform are possibly sending notifications to one or the other. And so if you're not getting notifications from counter media and you're getting them for Richard Inman, subscribe to both so that we know that you're on both. And like I say, we want to get this, I want to get this counter media platform up to 100,000 in short order. Sounds like a big battle. I mean, we're sitting on about 4,500 at the minute, but it's gone up massively in the last. I think it went up 999% in the last month, which I was pretty impressed with. So yeah, subscribe to the channel. The other thing I want to ask you to do, Tommy, as you know, is in court again on Thursday, and I've already done a video asking people to pray for him, and obviously that stands. If everyone could pray for Tommy tomorrow, if that's your thing, if you're a believer and you believe in prayer, pray for Tommy tomorrow. Let's have a day of prayer and fasting for Tommy tomorrow. But the other thing that I'd like you to do, and I'm just going to put it on the screen here now, is go to Urban Scoop and support Tommy on Urban Scoop if you're not doing so already. I'll tell you why. He's already getting legal bills in for this case. Now, if you remember, there was a bit of funding came from Elon Musk for that for a couple of facets, not the whole of the last case, but a couple of facets of the last case. It's totally different now. As far as I know, he is having to self-fund this. So there's no money coming from, from the richest man in the world. It's basically he's going to have to fund it himself as far as I know. So if you can jump across to Urban Scoop, give them a bit of support. The reality is, people who are doing this on a full-time basis, it is impossible. Like Tommy, it is impossible for him to earn any money any other way other than by donations. And even that, the deep state comes after you. They freeze your bank account. You know the story. So if you can support Tommy at Urban Scoop, please do. I don't get anything out of it. It's just I know they need money for these court cases. They need money for the event that's coming up on 13th of September. So please do that. Again, what I'll do, I'll go back and put the YouTube video up there. Here's Joseph. So I'm going to bring Joseph in now. Now, let me tell you something about Joseph. I said this in one of my earlier videos just before I bring him in. But to me, Joseph is like a really nice and smart version of Dominic Cummings. And that's a compliment. If you can hear that in the background, Joseph, that's a compliment. Yeah, he's smiling. So I'm gonna bring you in now, Joseph, and we'll crack on and see how we get on. So let's just bring Joseph in. Joseph, good evening to you. So you look like you're somewhere very, very elegant. You look like you're in a nice pub somewhere in London. Am I right?
Cafe Nero, but you're close enough, Richard.
That's a rich. You know what? You could have pretended you're in White's Gentleman's Club. Then everyone would have believed you because it looks so rich. You know what I mean? It doesn't.
Apart from
like
there's no tie today, but yeah.
Yeah. No, you don't need a tie for White's. I don't think. I was in there once. Did I have? Oh, I did have a tie, and you do absolutely. You do. Anyway, how are you, Joseph? Long time since we've seen you, mate. How you doing?
Not doing badly. How are you, mate?
Yeah. Well, I'm alive, which is always a bonus. If we're alive and we're speaking, it's a bonus, mate. Just before we start, Joseph, I want you to do a little pen picture of yourself for people on the channel that don't know you. Obviously, people that have seen you on Paul Thorpe's and on all the other stuff that you've been doing, but let people know who you are. And again, I'm not saying this to swell your head or give you sort of flattery, but I genuinely think that you're probably one of the smartest people on the right in terms of your political analysis, your strategic analysis. But just let people know who you are and what your background is, so that they know who's actually talking to them when you start giving your pearls of wisdom.
I appreciate that, Richard. Yeah, my background is I started out helping with sort of policy advisory probably about 6 years ago now, working on sort of think tank stuff, and then pretty much over COVID, I got into the more journalistic side of things. So I was working for the Epoch Times for a while, doing independent stuff for GB News and that kind of thing. And then more recently, I've set up my own political consultancy and strategy advisory company. And we work with a lot of people that you would know on the right, advising behind the scenes. I ran as a reform candidate in the local elections just gone. And yeah, that's pretty much my bag. I mean, if there's anybody that you know of who's fighting a good fight, I've probably worked with them over the years. And, I give my best take on things as much as I can.
Yeah, and I mean, I know some of the people that you work with, and you've done a pretty good job of getting their profile into a very, very prominent position. So you're doing well with that. And I think one of the things I noticed when we were talking to you, when we were doing the stuff with Paul Thorpe, I think you've got a very, very well balanced and grounded approach. There's a lot of people on the right that kind of seem to go off the deep end one way or the other, but you seem to have a very, very measured approach to what you're saying. So you don't just answer questions. If we ask questions, obviously we'll be hitting you with some stuff in the interview, but you seem to come at it very, very thoughtfully and balanced. And I think that's what's needed, because there's plenty of hotheads like me out there. We don't need any more. Do you know what I mean? We need some calm, measured people who can give sound advice. So yeah, I think tell us about where you've just been, Joseph, because that's interesting. You've just been to CPAC Europe. Tell us how that went. What was your input there, and what was your feeling of the overall vibe in Europe, and how us in the UK and obviously Ireland are kind of measuring up to the rest of our fellow Europeans?
Yeah, well, the mood there is very different, mainly because they're a lot more coherent in their parties and their philosophy than we are, unfortunately, on the right in the UK. Mainly because they've developed it themselves from scratch, basically, whereas we've got obviously a long history and a lot of infighting over the years between the different factions, even within the Conservative Party. What you're seeing where I was in Hungary, and before that in Poland, where my co-director was just before the Polish elections, there's a lot of homogenous thinking on the right over there. They agree on the key topics. They're sort of ahead of us on the immigration debate, as an example. They've closed the borders. They started restoring order. The funny thing is, even the left in a lot of these countries agree broadly on those issues. They might not take the same approach as the right does, but they do agree that there's a need for an end to mass migration. What I saw in Hungary was, an incredible meeting place for people from America, the UK, all across Europe, as far away even as some delegates from Asia. And of course, a heavy presence from the Trump team, as you'd expect. There were some very key speakers there, like Jack Posobiec and Steve Bannon and others like that. And of course, Liz Truss from our own country doing us proud. I was, there to support a few different clients, but also just to get the lay of the land and see how it's going. Like, if I'm being honest, I didn't want to come back. Budapest is one of my favourite cities. It's one of the safest cities in Europe. I think definitely the most beautiful city in Europe. We've got the Danube and the huge castle up on one side of it, and it's a very religious country as well. There's nothing really not to like about it, and I would highly recommend, if anyone has the time, viewers of the show, go out, take a trip to Budapest, and you might find yourself moving there if you've got enough money to retire. So yeah, that was my trip last week, and next week I'll be out in Italy, hopefully talking to some people close to Georgia Maloney. So yeah, just doing the European trips at the moment.
So, I mean, do you from what you've said there, it seems that really, especially in Eastern Europe, they've got their act together a lot more than we have. That there's more of a, obviously Orban. I mean, how long's he been president now? In
15 years, I think now.
15 years, and
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose it's different in so many ways, because, like you say, they're coming from a historically socialist communist base, so there's got to be a kickback and a reaction against that. How far are we behind them, do you think, Joseph, in terms of time and how well organized we are, or not well organized?
Well, a lot of that, I'd say, is exactly what you said. It's a kickback. There's a lot more polarity, right? So they've had the hard left. They've seen what it was like in action. And of course, man who we know well over here, Roger Scruton, conservative philosopher, he was a heavyweight in championing academic freedom and liberty during that time. In fact, he spent a lot of time in Budapest. They got 2 or 3 cafes named after him there with all of his works and his personal memorabilia. And what he did was basically to bring them out of communist oppression into an age of conservatism, then they very highly value the British tradition because of him. So they've learned from us. They've taken the best bits of what we had in the past, and as a reaction to communism, they become more polarized. See, there isn't really a centre ground in somewhere like Hungary. You might get a moderate candidate, but they'll still be more to the right or left than they are here. What's happened here, particularly since Thatcher disappeared from the political scene, is that there hasn't really been a stark contrast between right and left. There was New Labour, and then there was the Conservative Party, who essentially continued that mantle. And so we don't really see the same sort of setting politically over here as we do over there. Over there, the other thing they have is a lot of national pride. It's just part of their nature, really, to be proud of their history. We're not really connected with our history over here anymore, sadly. So there are a lot of indicators as to why they have a stronger culture there. And of course, 14 years in government, similar kind of time period that the Tories had. But Orban has done something with that country that, the Tories just couldn't. He revolutionised their family policy. He's created a far better media ecosystem. He's put money into the right places and the right things rather than vanity projects, and that's what we're going to learn from.
Yeah, I mean, what do you think? I mean, I was gonna come onto this anyway. What can we do on the right? Because obviously, I mean, I'm constantly banging the drum about unity, and then I come up against the brick wall. Are you still involved in reform, Joseph? Where are you at with the reform thing, with the reform project? I suppose that's the first one to sort of talk about, I guess. What's your take on everything? And again, I'm aware, I don't want you saying anything that's going to compromise you in any way, but where are reform at? And I guess if you're involved with reform, why should people trust reform in its current guise with all that's happened? It's quite a pointy question, but I've got my opinions, but I'm not going to push those on you. So just for the viewers that know my opinion, all my people on the channel know what I think of reform. How could you persuade me that reform is a good idea as a reform activist or candidate?
Yeah, I mean, the reason why I'm running reform, first and foremost, is that there's only one option, right? So if we're going to be real politic about it, there are multiple options. Do I think reform is a good option? Yes. Comparative to the Tory party, it's light years ahead. What they're doing behind the scenes, what they're doing in terms of policy, is pretty revolutionary. We haven't had this stuff certainly since Thatcher, and probably not before. Now, I think for some people, the argument against reform is perhaps they're not pushing hard enough on certain topics, all this kind of thing. What I would say is, Nigel Farage as a leader, Nigel Farage as a human being, has developed his policy strategy for 35 years or more. What he says is what you get. You're not going to get any different. He is completely ironclad in his beliefs. I personally think he's exactly the kind of leader we need, whether or not we like him. I personally get on with Nigel very well. I know some people don't. That's down to personal choice. Obviously, there's been splits and rifts over the last few years, and right, there always is. But reality is that Nigel is, in my opinion, the guy for the job. The reason being that to win in politics, it's not really about us. It's not really about the politicos and the people in the bubble and the people in the know. It's not really even about maybe the million people that surround them and read their news every day and look at their writing. Really, it's about how do you cut through with those people who have never voted in their lives before, or have maybe voted 20, 30 years ago and then given up because they've had a uniparty for so long. Well, there's only one man that would be recognised on the street, regardless of politics, and that's Nigel Farage. It's not Robert Jenrick. It's certainly not Boris Johnson. It's not any of those kind of characters. And neither is it any of the leaders of the other smaller parties. They simply wouldn't be known if they walked down the street. I remember there was a survey done after the beginning of the whole Rupert Lowe saga, and it was found that 2 in 10 reform members even visually recognised it. So let alone the wider population, something like 1 in 10 when we went out to the wider population. In fact, a lot of people thought it was David Amess, believe it or not, when that poll came out. And I don't think any of these people outside of Twitter, which is obviously a very different space, have the cut through that we think they do. Now, Nigel, on the other hand, having been a star in the jungle, having done X, Y, and Z, will always be the battering ram, the right. Love him or hate him, whether you agree with his policies or not. I do tend to agree with most of his policies. I think that they're pragmatic. I think that they shift the Overton window just far enough for where we are right now in this country. We're a very socially liberal country, as Colin suggests that. Country's certainly moving to the right on immigration, and I think Nigel is taking us there. But he's a sensible centrist. I wouldn't say that he's that far off the European movements that I've seen. There is a huge disparity. Someone like Orban is certainly more stringently Christian, but Nigel will use the word Christian now, probably more than he ever has done before. I mean, his family policy announcement the other week literally mirrored the Hungarian family policy, which I'd been pushing for 5 years with different think tank work. The idea that that could ever get into the hands of a mainstream politician, to me, in this country is unthinkable. The crypto announcement.
Could you just explain that policy for the listeners there
Sure.
and the viewers? Because again, I'm not exactly sure what he was actually pushing for, but if it was to help people have more children, then I would be for that. Because again, obviously, I mean, that's the way that we're gonna solve. Well, we're not going to totally solve the demographic crisis with that, but just explain exactly what he's planning, Joseph. So scrapping
the 2-child benefit cap essentially means that families have access to more support no matter how many children they go on to have. It's a very pro-natalist policy. It's essentially saying that if you have 5-6 kids, you'll be rewarded. Now, the pushback on that is, well, are we going to keep having the kids? Will there be the economy to support them? Will, for instance, people coming into the country who are having more children than us, will they then go on to replace us? All these kind of questions. But to me, that's secondary. What we're looking at right now is a complete breakdown in the way we view family, in the way we view marriage, in terms of structure as a whole within society. And what Nigel is saying is, no, you should be rewarded for having children. There's also a grant policy within it for young couples who are having children. I think this will be probably announced at some point. I don't know if it was in the initial policy package, but to do with helping people onto the housing ladder. This is all stuff they're doing in Hungary. There's also other things like tax incentives. So after a certain number of kids, women get a tax break, potentially for life. If it's only over, certainly in Hungary, if it's over 3 children, they basically have to pay 0% income tax. So not only do they have to not only do they get rewards for having children, but they also get rewarded if they then want to go back into their career. It's an incredibly modern, forward-thinking policy that still allows the traditional family unit to flourish. And the fact that Nigel is looking at this stuff right now, for me, is something like even 2-3 years ago, I couldn't have really seen any major politician in this country doing. The fact that they're waking up to the birth crisis. Again, another policy I liked the other day was this thing like crypto, creating a national Bitcoin reserve. I think that's amazing. That's what they've done in El Salvador. So say what you want about reform, but what they are doing is they are taking some of the best ideas from around the world, and that is what they will implement because they've got a mandate from the people to do it. If they fail on that, they will never be looked at again as a political option. So this is their only hope. It's their only hope to deliver on that mandate. People often say, oh, but what about Trump won? He promised all this stuff. The thing I'd say to people is that we've already had our Trump one. That was Liz Truss. Yeah. She tried. She would have done a lot of this stuff, but she had a gun to her head and she couldn't do it. Yeah. So Nigel's got the opportunity to learn from her. And I think he will behind the scenes. He's good at being, he's good at learning. And I think that when we get into government, it won't be perfect. Not everyone will be happy, but it'll be about 100 times better than anything we've had since Thatcher. I'm quite content with that, looking at the way the country's going.
Yeah. And again, Thatcher wasn't without a faults either, was she? I mean, I understand a lot of what she did, but I mean, the way heavy industry in the north of England was destroyed, and the shipyards, and the coal mines, and so on and so forth. So, nobody gets it right all the time, I think. And again, obviously, as you know, I'm involved with UKIP, but I think we're going to have to come to a stage, because my thing is, how can we actually bring all these things together? How can we bring the UKIP, get Ben back involved, all these clever people on the right? That's my thing. Is there a way of doing that, or is it just everybody's got to follow reform and that's the only show in town? Or is there a way that Nigel could even reach out without having to say anything to that lot. I mean, the infamous thing that Tice said about the supporters of the United Kingdom rallies and so on and so on. Well, there was hundreds of thousands of people there. Calling that lot was a massive own goal. Obviously, he can win without that, but surely it'd be better to try and bring everybody into the tent. Is there a way of doing that, do you think, Joseph, or is that a bridge too far for them?
Look, I think that those comments were said without real consideration of who he was talking to. I'm not going to sit here and defend him. I don't think it was a good comment at all, but I don't think that it was said with malice towards those who would want to support reform. I think it was said about so-called football hooliganism, and it was taken, he didn't say it, he didn't phrase it well, it was taken to mean everybody. And look, there is a history on the right in this country of a certain amount of thuggery and hooliganism that we do want to avoid. But that's a very small minority of people, and that is not the entirety of, let's say, the freedom movement, because most of those people are peaceful, law-abiding citizens who just want to see this country saved. And so I think what Nigel's going to be doing is creating a core coalition of excellent policies that have been tried and tested around the world. In a way, I would say he doesn't need to reach out to people, not to belittle their intelligence or their ability or their understanding, but the fact is we haven't been in government. We haven't done this stuff before. I've had a bit of experience trying to get policy through with the Tories, but it was like hitting my head against a brick wall. In these other countries, they've tried it. There's a Bitcoin reserve in El Salvador. There's an increasing birth rate in Hungary. There's some brilliant tech advancements in Japan and America. We've got to look at the countries that have done this stuff before. And really over here, it's about uniting everybody around the flag more than it is about uniting people around an individual. I don't think it really matters who it is, if it's Nigel or if it's somebody else who leads us into number 10. But Nigel's the only guy who can do it. And that's the important thing. And so when he gets in, what he has to do, the policies he has to implement are very, very obvious. We don't need to discuss more policy. This is always my fear with, smaller parties, the way they think. A lot of it is very policy heavy. And I mean, I'm a policy wonk, as you know, so I've got no problem with that. But to me, we've got enough policy. We know what to do. We know where the money's gone. We know net zero is a scam. We know that the borders are under attack. We know that our defence is weak. We know all the areas we've got to fix. It's just getting into power and implementing it. And I think the thing that Nigel does have to get right, and reform has to get right, is personnel. It's who you get into those positions when you win. I don't think we've got a shortage of talent. So where do I see people like the ones you mentioned coming in? I see them coming in to fill up positions in the civil service, to become MPs, to go out and change the course of this nation's history. And they can do that from within reform. I know that there was a lot of bloodshed, political bloodshed at the start of the party. That's because they were bloody scared about entryism. I would be too if I was them. They've been doing this for so long that they've got battle wounds in a sense. And now I think they're at the point where they can kind of settle down and start looking for talent.
No, do you know what I mean? They're valid points. I mean, I've got a lot of friends in reform, as you're probably aware of, and some of them in quite sort of prominent positions, and that's what they're saying to me. I mean, and again, I've got slightly different opinions, but I'm not going to push those tonight. Everybody knows what I think, and there's no point in me going over. That's why I want you to say that this is the pitch. Once they get into power, look, okay, let's say if they get into power, let's not be too. Let's not use the assumptive clause too much. But let's say they get into power, and you've got this monstrous civil service, you've got the quangos, you've got a judiciary that's hostile, you've got a media that's hostile. My question is, what is the plan to get things done, to have a equivalent of an Elon Musk or a RFK or all these massive talents that they've got in the States? Are there people there waiting in the wings to pounce on the civil service, to pounce, to give us freedom of speech, to because I know what something Ben Habib's been talking about is this idea of a great repeal act, where you repeal all the rotten legislation that's caused us all the problems. Is there anything in reform like that, or is it just we'll get into power and then work it out when we get there? So is the stuff, I mean, obviously I'm not asking you to give me away secrets, but is the stuff in the background that would give us confidence that if reform did get elected, that we would get what we want.
Yes, 100%. I mean, the biggest thing is that we have Americans property, and the nearness between the two camps, between the MAGA movement and what's going on here, is very important. I'm very confident at what's going on behind the scenes. I've got to say, I've met with enough people who know what they're doing. And it's not about the big personalities here. It's about really, really proper legislation. It's about people who understand how our system works. We don't have a written constitution. We can't go in and give directives and orders like Trump is doing in the States. There would be no space for someone like Elon Musk in this country because he wouldn't have a department to work in. What we do need, obviously, is good advisors, people who are technically competent. But a lot of this is boring stuff. It's legalism. There's about 5 to 10 different pieces of legislation that we've got to overturn in the first few weeks. A lot of Blair's legislation, which obviously needs to be done away with very quickly. Some older stuff, North Scotch Rebellion, which gave power to the civil servants back in the 1800s. That's a piece of legislation that should be overturned, in my opinion. There are certain items on the agenda that need to be worked in. But the second part of that is also tearing down those layers of bureaucracy, and that's replacing many of the civil servants with appointees who won't lobby on behalf of leftist agendas. It's getting a grip again of statistics like the OBR. It's about getting a handle on the money, the Bank of England, things like that. So it's not about breaking the system and starting again. It's about fixing what we used to work very well up until the 1900s, and particularly the latter half of the century. And all of this stuff is very doable. But at that point about the Great Repeal Bill is accurate. That's probably one of the most important things to get right on day one. And then it's also about staffing. It's about who you put into that position to manage those departments, because you're not going to scrap them all on day one. But it will be done over time. It'll be done over a period of months. We shut things down, budget things, work out how much is being wasted by all these unnecessary quangos, as an example. And it'll be a methodical process. What we really need is a lot of very hard-working, positive individuals. We don't need an Elon Musk necessarily. We need 100 people who are ready to knuckle down and work from dawn to dusk every day to achieve the legislation we need to pass through. And no one has seen a shake-up of this size in the British political establishment ever. It's just never happened before. So, obviously the banks will try and crash the markets and everyone will have a hoo-ha for the first few weeks, and it will be exactly the same as it was on the trust. But the difference is there's not going to be anyone in the party saying, oh, well, I'm resigning now, because we'll be the dominant force. There won't be a Tory party to cave to the financial system.
Yeah, I think this is. I mean, this is what interests me. I mean, because okay, let's say the right, the radical right. Whether it's reform or whatever form that takes in 2029. Let's say we win a slim majority, and we've got the SNP are kind of and maybe the SDLP and a few minor left progressive parties, Plaid Cymru, the Greens. They've got a few seats, and then the DUP and maybe a couple of TUV and independents from Northern Ireland, the kind of that nightmare scenario that Liz Truss had. If we're in that sort of situation, are we going to be able to achieve what we need to achieve? That's the first question.
Yeah.
And then after that, I have another one, but that's the first one.
So the thing with even a slim majority is that reform will have a single agenda. Anyone involved with him will have a single agenda. By that point, the 5 or 10 Tory MPs who are sound will be on board with that agenda. So I think what you'll see is that we will pass stuff still. It will get passed. It won't be done at the lightning speed we do with the supermajority. But even if we are, let's say, Nigel is in number 10 on the basis of the coalition, you're going to see a big clean out for the Cabinet Office, for the people who work in and around Downing Street. You're going to see a big clean out of the top layers of the civil servants pretty quickly, because most of those are political appointees. There won't be any issues with that kind of stuff. Now, will it be as dramatic in terms of legislation? You might get stymied on a couple of things. Let's say, the Tories maybe want to block you because they like having the human rights bill. well, then you'd have to start getting the lawyers out. But you can make board changes. And it's going to be something that takes a lot more effort if we get a slim majority, which again, I encourage people, then reform your vote. If it doesn't work out, then never vote for them again. Quite frankly, I wouldn't. But if you don't, you're going to be left with exactly what you're talking about. And the reality is that the Uniparty will be able to keep things more or less the same. And honestly, we've only got about 5 years left. So
yeah, I mean, I think that's the whole thing, Joseph. I think with me, there's such a sense of urgency in this, that we've got to get it right in 2029. And there's a big chunk of people out there that are totally disenfranchised. Well, I think it's about 19 million people didn't vote. Was it in the last election? Was it something like that? Or 19 million
yeah,
people?
it's normally about 40% that don't vote.
Yeah, and that's of registered voters. So there's a massive untapped potential there. And this is where, again, and I sound like a broken record, but I keep coming back to things like the sort of street movement that we got going, the populism among the British working class. It's finding a way of bringing reform together with that base, and showing some respect to that base without compromising on what reform believe, but at the same time finding a way of, and you know who I'm talking about and what I'm talking about, finding a way of squaring that circle. I'm very aware I'm not I don't want to get you in a compromising position by saying yes or no to anything I'm saying, but you understand what I'm saying? Because there's a lot of people, I think, that are turned off by some elements of reform because of the way that certain people have been treated by reform. And it's finding a way to bring everybody into that big tent, which I think would make us a lot stronger than we are at the minute. And I think it could be done without compromising anybody on any side if there was a bit of goodwill. Does that make sense?
Look, I totally agree. The first thing I'll say to it is that if you look at the elements of reform that are working class, the people already in the party, they're the ones who will bring those people in ultimately. It's not going to be the leadership. It's not going to necessarily be MPs. It could be good local MPs when we get them elected. But the reality is it's always the grassroots that builds these movements. And that's why so much time was invested into professionalising the party and making it palatable and open to all and all the rest of it, because they wanted to make sure that there was a system in place to weed out people who are there for bad causes. Now, in my opinion, they might have gone too hard in some areas. I don't think that that's an unfair comment. I think they did it because some people who were making those decisions were perhaps quite new to the people and don't fully understand the political landscape and all of whom their support base is. But again, look at the fruits of what's going on. You just had a reform pub opened up, somewhere it was, Blackpool or wherever it was. There are things happening that have a distinctly working class taste. And, I say that as somebody who comes from the Midlands, from a small market town up there. Dad was in the army, uncle's in the army, all the rest of it. So I know how these people think. They're my family, some of them. If I think where I am, which is about half an hour away from Telford up in the Midlands, we know all about the grooming gangs because we've lived it. There's people in my community who are harbouring the children who were, as a result of abusive relationships. There's all kinds of stuff going on in the local area. So I've got a pretty good read on how these people think. And yeah, some of them probably, would prefer to have a different leader or to have somebody else, but they've also accepted that there is no other option. And if they want to see something done about the grooming gangs, they've got to vote Nigel Farage into number 10, along with the rest of the reforms. And that from the grassroots, we will get initiative, we will get action, because they will be the support base that they have to cater to. And let me tell you this, the thing I saw when I was a candidate walking around wasn't the number of Tories who wanted to vote for me, it wasn't the number of Labour voters who wanted to vote for me, it was the number of people who said to me, I'm going to vote for, I didn't even know about local elections, but I'm voting this time for reform. This is cutting through. This is cutting through. And I will say this as well. A lot of these people will never have heard of any of the above. They'll never have heard of Tommy Robinson. They'll never have heard of Rupert Lowe. They'll never have heard of Nigel Farage. What they have heard of is this huge immigration crisis that's happening on our border. that they're seeing happen in a town down the road. My town, 12,000 people, we have suspected 2 hotels full of illegal immigrants in there. I mean, it's insane. We had the Home Office turn up to take out some illegals who were working in the shop while I was in my campaign. We had someone stabbed down at the local Turkish barber. We had 7 local Turkish barbers in my town. You know, I don't want to put aspersions on them because they haven't been raided yet. But all the other ones in Shropshire has been.
It's
all of this
incredible.
stuff is happening.
Yeah, I mean, when I was involved in making the films with Tommy about the grooming in Telford, and what we found was a massive organized crime organization that was running up and down the spine of the UK. It was going up to Blackburn, Bradford, Birmingham. You know, there's some very prominent lawyers that we were looking. There's one very prominent lawyer that's, I'm not going to say what's just happened to him, but he's in a little bit of trouble himself. And we were looking at him because in his office were two of our suspects worked for him as solicitors and as paralegals in his office. So that the ingrained nature of what's going on with the grooming right the way through the country. It's not just grooming, it's drugs, it's people trafficking, it's money laundering, it's Turkish barbers, it's kebab shops, which are obviously the money laundering fronts. So there's and obviously I'm not saying that every single person in that community is doing that, but the reality is we found an organized crime network. We went to the National Crime Agency with all our evidence and they told us to clear off, you know. So it's really deep. It's really deep. And the other thing that needs to be looked at is these houses of multiple occupancy, because you're getting a lot of young girls coming out of children's homes at 16, because at 16 they kind of get booted outside of 16 or 18. They get booted out. They're on their own. They're going into HMOs, and the HMOs, and this is what the girls call them. The girls call them freshie migrants. These are the guys that basically either come here illegally or they've come in, you know, through the supposedly legal migration routes, which are run by the same mafias, and they're going in there. So you've got young vulnerable girls who've come out of care going straight into HMOs. And goodness, and you know, you can work it out. And again, we had all this evidence, but we just didn't have the resources to basically to pursue it any further than we did. I mean, we had hundreds of people on our databases that were suspects, and we had, you know, a lot of evidence, but not enough evidence to point a camera in front of them and say, you did this, you know, and get the gotcha moment. So what can be done about that? I mean, we're going off. We'll step away from reform. What can we do about this massive network that is operating throughout the UK, apparently with the not necessarily the blessing, but that, you know, a blind eye been turned by the police, the Labour councillors, and so on and so forth. Obviously, for a political party like Reform, if they handle that right, it's a massive vote winner as well, because everybody knows about it now. So, but what can be done if you guys got into power in 2029? What? And again, I'm not asking you for a full analysis. So what do you think could be done about that situation?
You're already seeing some of what could be done in the way that local councils are being audited now, the ones that have been won. A lot of financial corruption will be exposed, obviously even more in central government than it is at local level. So that's the first thing to think about. The second thing is that these inquiries, I hate to say it, even the work of journalists counts nothing unless you can legislate. You know, it's certainly down to us to spread the message far and wide, but the reality is until someone's going to take legal action, it's very difficult to get anything done. And so what you've got to hope for is majorities in areas where this stuff is happening. And that can only be achieved by voting. There isn't really another solution to this, unfortunately. I mean, it's so culturally ingrained that until you can actually change legislation on a national level, there's not that much that can be done. What can be done is to stop what's happening right now that is criminal. And obviously, we know it's still ongoing in many locations. That's what needs to be stopped. What I'm saying is that perhaps justice won't be served until there's a change of government. We can stop things by heavy exposure. Look at what Starmer's doing with certain issues now. I mean, that influence isn't coming from his own mind. I have it on pretty good authority, but he had to call up someone called Lord Maurice Glaston, who, if you know of him, he was the leader of the new Labour movement, quite a close friend to Roger Scruton. And Number 10 was calling him up for advice. In fact, around the time when Starmer came out with his now infamous speech about borders. So they're turning to what I call the right of the Labour Party for influence, because they're so pressured, heavily pressured by reform, that they've got to do that if they want to retain credibility with their predominantly working class voter base. So
Yeah.
the more pressure we put on externally, the more pressure that Nigel puts on in Parliament, or the journalists put on from the external mechanisms that we do have, which is obviously Twitter, citizen journalism, but also now even mainstream picking up on it. That will see changes, because what he won't want to do is give free votes to reform. So between now and then, there is a lot that can be done.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, there's to me, it's going to be one of the key issues over the next. It's not going to go away, because it's still going. It's still going on, and if it's not dealt with, whatever government comes in, if they don't deal with that situation, I think there's probably two in terms of the right. There's probably two or three issues. Two, three. One is the grooming gangs. The other one is the illegals, the boats, and the other ways that people are coming into the country illegally, and obviously the migrant hotels and all the rest of the nonsense are a spin-off from that. And then I think the final one is the net migration figures, that we're just seeing our communities completely changing before our eyes. I mean, I live in Northern Ireland, and I'm not saying this in a racist way. I'm not making a racist point, because that's not the way I am. But just seeing the demographic of kids now going to school in Northern Ireland. There's girls going to school with a hijab on. There's guys dressed in the traditional, Islamic dress. That's in Northern Ireland, and we're relatively untouched by this thus far. But when I come to England, I'm just like, because obviously I see it a lot more, because when I'm coming to England from Northern Ireland, I'm just like, man, when am I going to get to England? So it's like, so I think to me, they're the three big issues that people on the right are interested in, that reform can go after: the grooming gangs, the stopping the boats. The other thing I did want to ask about reform is, what's now? Tice was pushing this very heavily before the last election, and I was calling our friend Noel, that comes on Paul's channel quite a lot. And Noel's great. I mean, he's an absolute diehard reform. He's enthusiastic. He will not ever say anything negative about reform. No matter how much I pushed him on points, he wouldn't say anything negative. But the net zero migration really troubled me, because the way I said it, I says, well, we're losing Tarquin, we're losing Joseph, we're losing Paul, and we're getting Mohammed, Aisha, and Abdul from Afghanistan, Somalia, and Libya. So is that still the policy, that basically it's a one in, one out, or are they going to be more radical and more like UKIP and say, do you know what, we're going to have a moratorium, we're going to stop everyone but essential people coming in? Where's reform at with that, Joseph? Because again, Noel was always a bit ambiguous on it,
I think there's a really, really simple point to make on this, which is that it's not just about the net zero phrase, it's also about the types of immigration that will be permitted. And they'd be for very specific skill sets and very specific jobs. And so you wouldn't get somebody coming from that part of the world unless they happen to be the best neurosurgeon in the world.
Yeah.
And that's highly unlikely from the medical systems that you're referring to. Would they potentially come from India? Yeah. And there comes a point where you sort of have to say, well, if we need that person to come into the country, of course we will.
Of course. I think everybody gets that. I think, Joseph, it's the way the system's been abused. I think that grieves people, when you're getting people that obviously they're not going to be net contributors to the economy.
Well, that's the big problem. I mean, the thing is, if you have a one in, one out system, essentially what you're saying is you're going to be going unless you can contribute to the economy, and you're going to be coming in only if you can contribute to the economy. That's the basics, benchmark, I think. Obviously, there are other considerations. First of all, being mass deportations for illegal immigrants. I think that's something that almost firmly committed to. But in terms of how the rest of the country blends together, well, I think it would very much be based on citizenship. So if you're a citizen here, you will be treated as a citizen. If you're not,
Yeah.
and you commit a crime, you'll be gone. You know, it will
Yeah.
just be a zero tolerance policy.
Yeah.
And that's going to be already a huge deal better than what we have now. Now, the other thing is that a lot of people will leave by themselves. Why? Because they won't have the benefit system. They won't have the welfare state to rely on. Most of them come here for that. So if they don't have that, well, they're not going to be able to keep going, and they will ultimately have to leave. This system, in a way, is very easily self-corrected, because, like you said, a lot of it is because of abuse of the system. That's why people stay. But that's because they're allowed to. If they're not allowed to, if those loopholes aren't there, they will leave. It's simple as. A lot of them want to leave anyway because our healthcare system isn't as good as the one they have back home, unfortunately. So, you know, a lot
Yeah.
of people are here purely for economic benefits rather than necessarily lifestyle benefits. And as soon as they stop to receive those, they won't be hearing.
Yeah. Okay. So let's park reform for a while, because there's a bigger issue probably in the country, which is people to call it culture, but to me, it starts with faith. And I want to talk to you as you're a man of faith. You know, how do we? And obviously, it's not really up to us. It's up to God to do a lot of this. But how do we reset the culture, obviously, and if there's any help that the politicians can give us, obviously that's going to be great as well. But you know, we're in a situation where something seems to be shifting spiritually in a positive direction. That's the sense I have in my spirit, and certainly just seeing people like Alex Phillips getting baptized at the weekend, Maya Tusi, some very prominent people. Tommy came out of prison with a cross around his neck. So there seems to be things happening spiritually in the country. How can we nurture that and help that as a country? And is that, you know, people talk about culture and they talk about culture being upstream of politics, but I think culture is downstream of religion. So the predominant religion, and let's call secular humanism a religion. So when that's been the predominant force for the past 50 years, that's had an effect on the culture and on society. We see it all the time. We've got this, you know, the Rainbow Month coming up and all the rest of it, or we're in it now. So how do we nurture the spiritual faith side of things? And what's your thought on where we're at with that? Are we in a revival? Are we going to see a Christian revival? You know, how are you feeling about that?
I think there's a duality between the breakdown of the family and the breakdown of religion. They go hand in hand. Obviously, you know, like you said, ultimately it's God who's going to do the work in many cases. But if we uphold the family unit and make that an ideal structure, you will naturally see parents at a younger age who want to start thinking about the future of their children, and part of that future is spiritual. And
Yeah,
I think that is probably the easiest way that we solve this problem from a human perspective, is to encourage family, to encourage community building, to encourage people to get back in touch with what it means to be um, human, essentially. And one of the things that will be seen as a fruit of that is obviously the reflection of Christianity in a homogenous, monogamous, stable family unit. And I think that is, you know, something that we should think about. Ultimately, families are small reflections of the Trinity, in a sense, if you want to call it that, term it that. You know, the love between the man and the woman gives and creates something that we all need, which is future life. And
yeah,
so, if we get back to basics, what we'll see very quickly is that those young families, many of whom I know, will be looking for a rock and a basis to build their families on. And ultimately, that will be the church, because that is how it always has been. Um, and look, the encouraging thing is that younger people are already seeking this stuff out. All of my friends, without exception, are either converting or have converted, or at least picking up a Bible because everyone else is. You know, and so everybody is on this journey. I think pretty much I would put it down to Brexit, and then also to COVID, because people came out of that sort of without much to really rally around, and they began looking for something else. And I know that period deepened my faith. I mean, I essentially reverted back during that period, think many other people my age probably have a similar experience, and many of them I know have now gone on to start building families.
Yeah.
You know, and that is the basis of how we survive. You know, it's getting back to the idea that having kids is a good thing, and having a community is a really good thing.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and I think obviously, again, I come from Northern Ireland, which is riven with sectarianism, and I've never really got the sectarian sort of stuff. I mean, I'm Presbyterian. I think are you from a Catholic background,
Yeah.
Joseph? Are you Catholic? Yeah, and again, there's plenty of people now converting to Orthodox Christianity. To me, you know, we can all kind of learn from each other. There's a deep, rich blessing in every single stream of Christianity. So it's a question of, I suppose, one of the problems that we've got in the UK is certainly in the Church of England is there's not a lot of Christianity in the Church of England to a large extent. There are some great evangelical, Church of England churches, but there are a lot of them that leave a lot to be desired. And I think one of the things I'm going to work on is trying to build a very basic website with some basic Christian teaching and just start promoting it through my channels. I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on it because obviously, you could go down a whole lot of rabbit holes with that, but just, the Apostles' Creed, the Nicene Creed, the Ten Commandments, Sermon on the Mount, just some basic Christianity, a bit like C.S. Lewis, mere Christianity, because I think it's the denomination thing I'm not really interested in. I'm interested in getting back to basics and seeing if that can have a positive impact on people. Because the thing that worries me is, Joseph, if somebody goes to a Church of England church with a pink-haired lesbian vicar, they're probably not going to get great teaching. So I think we've got a kind of duty to, and I'm not a pastor or a preacher, but we've got a duty to share our faith in a way that people can understand. Because I would say if you went out in the street now and asked people, rhyme off the Ten Commandments, they would be, really probably struggling to do that. Your average Joe in the street would probably not be able to tell you what the Ten Commandments are. They'd probably be able to tell you some of the big ones, like don't kill and don't steal, but whether they could get down into the, into all 10. And that's just like very, very basic. Same as the Lord's Prayer. When I was a kid, we always said the Lord's Prayer in school. You went to confirmation in the Church of England, you learnt the Apostles' Creed, the Lord's Prayer, all that sort of stuff. So that's all missing. So it's a question of finding ways, I think, to rebuild that. And is there a political way to do that, or is it purely going to be driven by us at grassroots level and us using our media platforms to do that?
Well, the comment you got highlighted there says the revival of young men in churches, and I think that is something we need to talk about. Your analysis of the kind of vicar you might find is one of the issues, right? Which is a certain feminization of Christianity, not in a derogatory sense, but in a sort of watering down way. We've got to rediscover some of the masculinity of the West, I think, as a whole. And that's where politics comes in. That's where having a cause to fight for comes in. Because what young men really want to see is leadership, right? Women will not necessarily be led in the same way by political leaders as men will be. They tend to be more nurturing, more family oriented, more empathic towards the immediate, cares and concerns that they have, whether that's in their family or whether that's in their circle in life, whereas men will be going out to look for leadership. It's a very different psychology, and obviously both need to be catered for to a certain extent. But I think the real crisis for our generation's masculinity, and what we have to do is restore a Christianity that is embracing its roots rather than trying to explain them away. And this is something I always found quite interesting about Andrew Tate, as an example, who, as you probably know, I'm not a big fan of at all. I've written against them a lot. I think a lot of what he's done is damaging to young men, but it feminizes them and sexualizes them in a way that is very demeaning. But one thing he said, I will say is completely true, which is that Christianity is perceived to be a weak religion. And that is why he converted to Islam, and why many other young men will convert to Islam, because they're looking for a brotherhood, and for, an outlet to their masculinity. We need to provide that within Christianity. We've got to stop hiding from that fact. And
Yeah,
until we do, we won't be able to change.
I totally agree, and I think if you look at the core of Christianity, I mean, personally, my opinion on Tate is he converted to Islam because it suited his licentious lifestyle. Because
Right.
if you're going to copy the prophet, you can have quite a few wives and you can do all sorts of outrageous, unpleasant stuff. So, and again, I'm saying that a bit flippantly, but the reality is that's why it can be appealing to some people, because it's a license to do stuff that you probably wouldn't do. But one of the things I think in Christianity, one of the things that I think is a massive challenge, if we really understand what Christianity is about, and there's a verse in Ephesians, I think it's Ephesians 5:20. Oh, is it 5:25? Anyway, I think it's 5:25. Could be wrong on that. But in Ephesians, there's a passage that says that a man should love his wife as Christ has loved the church and gave himself for it. And if you just meditate on that, just that one scripture, you know, for a day, you'll realize how massively, as husbands and people that are going to get married, to women, how far we fail on that. And it's been something that's, man, it's challenged me absolutely massively, because Christ loved the church to the point of going to death and beyond death, and literally into hell for the church to redeem it. That's the gospel. And obviously conquered death and rose again, but he suffered more than any human being has ever suffered or ever will suffer, because he took the sins of the world. So that is the most masculine act. And then when the Bible's telling us that we should do exactly the same for our wives and for our families, that's not Andrew Tate's licentious, treat women like pieces of meat and be a macho cage fighter. That's not, you don't have to be a cage fighter to be a man. You have to be someone who does what's right and stands four square for
Yeah.
and again, listen, I'm talking as a completely failed human being, so I don't want people thinking that I've got this together, because I really haven't. I've messed up more times than enough, but that's what we've got to aspire to, and that's what's been challenging me. When I look at that, I go, well, that's what God's calling me to do, and I failed dismally in doing that. But it's time to get my act together, and I think, if we can all do that, man, that'd be something else.
Yeah. Well, look, this is one of the last things I'll say, because I've got to head off at the hour.
Yeah,
But I think that maybe what we need to leave with is that we don't necessarily all need to be cage fighters, but we need to have potential to be them. And I think that's something we've got to rediscover is, yes, you want to temper your ability to harm and your ability to danger, but you also want to embrace the fact that that's within you and not try and water it down and emasculate yourself. I think courage is what's necessary, the ability to be able to fight, even if we don't have to,
yeah,
spiritually and physically, in a sense, because at the end of the day, if your family's the one getting attacked, physically or spiritually, you're the one that has to repel that attack. And so people need to get smart as to the battle that they're fighting. It's not a battle entirely of flesh and blood, although that's a heavy part of it. And they need to understand some of what they're up against, and the best way to do that is to read scriptures, in my opinion.
absolutely. Totally agree, Joseph. Joseph, listen, thanks so much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on there. And we'll do it again, because I'd love to. It would be good to actually get you on for 2 hours. I mean, I've got to dash off as well, because I've got a meeting to go to in about half an hour. But it's been great having you on. Let's do it again. And again, I hope I haven't got you in trouble with reform. I was very well behaved. Hopefully I didn't ask you too many difficult questions, because I'm aware a lot of guys, when I'm talking to people in reform, it's vital that you guys stay in reform. We don't want you guys leaving reform. It's not my thing, but I don't. To me, what you're doing is incredible, and your position needs to be protected there, because I know what you believe, and I think it's pretty much exactly what I believe, or else I wouldn't have had you on, and given you just such an easy time to express that. And I think, again, to me, if we seek God and seek to look after our families, and then the flag thing and the politics thing, even though it's massively important, we probably talk about it more than anything else. But it's all downstream of that, isn't it? And that's, you know, that's basically where we're at. Have you got any parting words, or are you done here, Joseph?
Well, thanks for having me, Richard. Yeah, one thing I'd say is that most people I know in reform think very similarly to me. I don't think there are many people who disagree with a lot of what I say. Of course, we'll have differences. Of course, there will be differences of opinion on policy or faith, all kinds of things. And not everyone is going to be completely on side. But we all believe in the primary three things, right? Which is family, community, and an ability to live life the way you want to, in the truest sense, not in the hedonistic sense, but in the sense that it gives you personal responsibility and self-sacrifice. And one of the things I say about reform, what encourages me is the amount of entrepreneurs in there. The reason why I say that is because I know as a business owner how challenging it is to sacrifice stuff to build a business. And if they're willing to do that, they'll also be willing to build a country back together again. You know, and that's my parting words. I do have to dash, but it's been a pleasure talking to you.
The guys did a song that they always play out. So you dash off. I'll close this down, and I'll play the song that these guys are asking for, because they always ask me to play a little song at the end of it. But Joseph, listen, pleasure having you on. We'll do it again soon. All the best. Hope everything's, you know, going really well in the business. And let's talk again next month and see if we can get you on again to go into a bit more depth. Okay. Cheers, Joseph.
Cheers, mate.
See you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Right, guys, great. I really enjoy it. Sorry for not interacting with the comments too much. Joseph's such a smart guy, and I really think he's got a lot to say. And again, I don't agree. Everyone knows what I think about reform and Nigel Farage, but I think when you got someone like Joseph coming on, rather than sort of giving my opinion or give the opinion that you guys all know that I've got, it's a really good idea to let him say what he's got to say, and if he's, put his point of view across, because at the end of the day, we are all on the same side, and that's what it's all about. Now, Barbara, you were asking me to find the song. Bear with me, guys, while I find this song, and we'll get it played. We'll let the Men of England song play us out, but just let me find it. And again, thanks for everybody for jumping on. We're a bit low in numbers tonight. We only had about 400 people. We were doing streams last week. We were up to, gosh, about 2,000 people watching on the streams last week. So yeah, let's just get this going here. So I need to pull that back. Okay. This is where I need a producer to help me out with all this sort of stuff, but just bear with me. Let's try this now. Share screen. Share.
Where are the men of England, those heroes brave and bold? Where are the men who bled and died in foreign wars untold? The men who conquered all and stood for faith and love, the men who looked to guidance from the Father up above. Where are the men of England, the heroes brave and bold? The men who stood for faith and truth, whose honor wasn't sold. Where were the men of England when abusers so depraved took the daughters of our nation, who forever they enslaved? What of the men of England that looked the other way? They took the country shilling, they never made their play. Where are the men of England, the heroes brave and bold? The men who stood for faith and truth, whose honor wasn't sold. The vile police and vice squad, they all seemed quite amused, as at the hands of groomers our daughters were abused. The politicians blamed the lads who fall. Where are the men of England, the heroes brave and bold, the men who stood for faith and truth, whose honor wasn't sold? Where are you, men of England? For now we all must stand. The future of our children is still within your hand. The future not yet written for this green and pleasant land. Where are you, men of England? The heroes brave and bold, the men who stood for faith and truth, whose honor wasn't sold. Where are the men of England? The heroes brave and bold, the men who stood for faith and truth, whose honor wasn't sold. Where are you, men of England? For now we all must stand. The future of our children is still within your hand. Where are you, men of England? For now we all must stand. The future of our children is still within your hand. The future not yet written for this green and pleasant land. Where are you, men of England? The heroes brave and bold, the men who stood for faith and truth, whose honor wasn't sold. Where are you, men of England? For now we all must stand. The future of our children is still within.
This morning, my friends, I asked a question.
Well, guys, that was good. I enjoyed that, and again, thanks Barbara for asking me to do the thing. Kelly, I apologize for this. It's not on Spotify. I still haven't worked out how to do it. I'm doing so much other stuff at the minute, and I should put it on Spotify because I think we probably get to #1 with that song. To be brutally honest with you, I sent it to Tommy last week. He loved it. So he hasn't shared it yet though, but he loved it. But so yeah, it's good, and I think Joseph was a good guest. And again, there's a lot of comments in here about the issues that I have with Nigel. I agree with all of them. I'm not convinced that reform's the answer by any means. You know, if I was, I would have joined. Well, actually, no, they wouldn't let me join the party. But the reality is that that's part of the reason. I mean, the fact that they've been very exclusionary towards the British working classes, and I have a big problem with that. And I think there's a better way of doing it, but it's a question of, I guess it's a question of just seeing what happens, seeing what Rupert and Ben Habib do. I've heard rumours in the background that there's things afoot, but we don't know yet for sure. So there's a lot going on. Carol, I would agree with that. I think. By the way, can everyone hear me there? Because I know I was muted for a little while. There's a lot going on with Farage for sure, and I have massive worries about it. And my issue is I don't think we can afford to get it wrong at the next election. I think that's where Joseph's coming from as well. Joseph's a very sincere guy. I think he genuinely believes in the reform project, and he's a smart guy. So maybe I've got it totally wrong, but I think we've got to sit down and work out and cover all the bases off. And I keep going back to the pledge. I didn't mention that Joseph was involved in promoting the pledge when we first started doing it. But I didn't mention it on that stream because I think people get a bit sick of me talking about the pledge. But the truth of the matter is that the pledge is without doubt basically a massive part of the jigsaw. And the more people that we get to sign it, and again, please sign it and share it with your friends, with your family. There was one of the viewers, one of the subscribers said to me a few weeks ago that they had a pledge party and they wouldn't let anybody have any food until they signed the pledge. Now, I'm not asking people to be coercive like that because maybe but I thought it was funny, and I thought it showed a lot of commitment. It showed a heck of a lot of commitment to the project and to the pledge. Don't like the way he flip flops. Yeah, I agree. Listen, I absolutely agree. I don't trust Nigel at all. And what I would like to see is, I'm going to be brutally honest. I would like to see Nigel gone out of politics. I'd like to see Zia Youssef gone, Tice gone. I'd like to see Ben and Rupert and maybe Liz Truss and some of the good people on the right. Others that Colston, the guy from the SDP, I'd like to see them having a very, very prominent role in politics. And I'd like to see the pledge being the ideology behind that. Now, again, what I want and what we get is they're going to be two different things. And I'm certainly not perfect and I don't have all the answers to everything. But I think, and obviously I think Tommy, without a shadow of a doubt, Tommy is the most important political figure in British politics, and people just haven't realized it yet. They haven't because they don't know. And again, I'm not deifying Tommy, because Tommy's a flawed man in exactly the same way that I am and other people are. But I think what people don't realize about Tommy is his incredible leadership ability, his sense of humor, his loyalty to his friends, and his pure stubbornness that he will never surrender, and so I think there's a lot going on. Okay, so Winston's guest is on with Nick Buckby, regular Rainbow. You see, I was trying to work out why the views are so low tonight. I mean, obviously we want to get to we want to get good numbers on, because obviously I think it's important that people hear these discussions and hear what's been said, because then they can make their own minds up. If I'm wrong, thinking that Farage is not everything that he seems, then I will put my hands up. If he saves this country, if they get elected and he saves this country, I'll put my hands up and I'll say, yep, I was wrong, when he lets me out of prison. So yeah, I think there's a lot to be going on. We do need to pray for Tommy. I've said in another video, and again, this is completely up to people what they do, but I think it'd be good if you're a Christian to pray and fast for Tommy tomorrow. That's what I'm going to do, and we just need to pray that it goes right for Tommy on Thursday. I mean, I've got concerns. Are they going to give him bail conditions that make it difficult for him to operate and do his job? Are they going to try and remand him? So I have real concerns. I have real concerns with this charge as well. I mean, it's a 10-year prison sentence if it goes wrong. So there's massive implications, and it's great to have him out, but we need to have Tommy out, and out in a way that they're never going to be able to pull this on him again. And I don't know how we get to that position. And I think, a lot of people prayed for him when he was in prison, but I think he needs probably more prayer now he's out of prison than he did when he was in prison, because they are gunning for him and they are going to try and take him out. And he's not backing down. He ain't backing down. So yeah, still have the image of Tommy kicking the doors of the. Well, I see him a bit like an Oliver Cromwell figure, walking into Parliament and just telling everyone to go, just get out, the lot of you, But lots of toxic people on YouTube. Pray for Tommy. Yeah, that's true. There are toxic people. More boots on the ground. Yep, we do need more boots on the ground. I mean, what I found in the last few years, that there's a very small cadre of people that do all this stuff, and it's the same faces every demo, same people doing stuff. And yes, we're getting bigger crowds now, but we need the silent millions, getting involved in this that we're doing, and we need the silent millions getting involved in the whole, the whole movement. Guys, I'm gonna dive off here. Thanks for everybody that joined and watched. Really appreciate it. Again, thanks to Joseph for coming on. But if you're in London on Thursday, or if you're anywhere near London, or if you can get to London outside the court, because I think having 10-20,000 people outside Westminster Magistrates Court on Thursday morning, it starts at, I think, 10 o'clock. I think 10 o'clock it starts, but it'll be like an all-day thing. Just everybody gathers. I think the weather's going to be okay, and if it's not, it's not. Even if it rains, it's going to be warm rain because it's June. So yeah, please try and get to London on Thursday. it'll be good. I mean, you know, it'll be, when I say it'll be good, obviously it's not good that he's in court, but it'll be good to be together with people that support Tommy. So just, you know, get there. And look, there's people putting in the comments again about rioting. No, we're not going to go and riot anywhere. Okay, that's not what we're going to do. We're not about rioting. We're not about breaking the law. We've totally changed the way street demonstrations are done on the right in the UK in the past since 2017. They're not violent. They're not descending into violence. Basically, we're you know, we do things peacefully. You know, when I first started doing this, was a pastor friend of mine came to me, says, don't do it like a, you know, a hooligan. Do it like Martin Luther King Jr. In other words, do it peacefully. And that's what Martin Luther King Jr. did peacefully. And again, Tommy is very much in that ilk. Martin Luther King Jr. never stood for election, but he still had a massive influence. And that's where we need to see Tommy at. Guys, listen, thanks everyone. Thanks everyone for coming on. Get to London on Thursday if you can, and don't forget to book your tickets for the 13th of September, because no matter what they do to Tommy, the 13th of September will go ahead, and the state's got to be aware of that. And if they're stupid enough to imprison him before the 13th of September or try and stop him attending, then the demonstration will be even bigger. And it will be even more powerful. So they just need to really, really think about what they do. Yes, Carol, I get it. The long goodbye. Just I love everybody that's on the channel. That's the problem. You know what I mean? So okay, guys. Well, listen, I'll see you all soon. I think I'm on tomorrow with Tarquin, who's doing a lot of really, really good work on the farmers, and he'll be able to tell us what's happening with the farmers. You know, the no farmers, no food thing. That's really, really massively important. So that's going to be tomorrow night. I'm not sure if it's 7 o'clock. I haven't got a timing yet, but I'll work out a timing and I'll put it on the channel. You know, sort of by lunchtime tomorrow, because I need to have a chat with Tarquin, just make sure he's still okay with that. So okay, guys. Well, listen, I'll see you all soon, and yep, let's support the farmers. Let's keep this going, and keep sharing this, and keep subscribing to these channels and liking these channels. The Richard Imber one and the I was going to say the pledge one, the Counter Media one. You can do the pledge as well, because the more people that we have subscribed to the channels, the bigger the voice we have and the more difference we can make. It's as simple as that. And there's other stuff I'm doing in the background. I'm building websites for Counter Media. I'm going to build another one relating to faith. So there's going to be plenty going on. And again, the people that have been supporting me, thank you very, very much. You know who you are. You know how much you've helped. It has been massively, massively appreciated. And yeah, just you know, I can't thank people enough for what they've done. And let's just keep doing it. Keep supporting Tommy as well, because he needs help as well with all the stuff that's going on. Right, Carol, I'm definitely going now. Okay, it was Carol, wasn't it, who was saying that? See you soon.